Thank you. Vivianne, if I can go to you. We've heard that from the case of the Philippines and Mexico, how certain conditions came together to really constitute a strong driver to migration, where people did not really have a choice. I know through your work at IOM, you have also looked at drivers, maybe from a different context as well. You have done also a kind of an academic research on the drivers of migration in the context of Bangladesh and other countries in the region. What are some of the findings that you are seeing as the main drivers of migration, and how are they different between different countries? And maybe I can ask you as well to break it down for us. Is it different in terms of the different countries that people go to as countries of destination, or are the drivers the same in that kind of layering approach? To you, Vivianne.
Thank you. And first of all, welcome everybody. It's nice to see such a diverse group of participants. Before I dive a bit into to my short statement, I would like to stress that I've been working in migration for over a decade. And I've been very lucky the last years, because I started off as a scholar, as an academic, and then I joined IOM, where I was very practical on the ground, trying to do programs with migrants. And then since the last couple of years, I actually can combine the two. So bringing a bit of the research on the table, but keeping a very close operational mindset. So I wanted to give actually I wanted to throw some thoughts out there, because what I've been doing since 2016 now, and it has really evolved over time, because we learn and the landscape also becomes much more broad when it comes to this type of research. I've been trying to understand drivers through two very large data collection exercises. One is called the Comprehensive Migration Flow Survey, where we have done thousands and thousands of surveys with migrants before, during the migration route, in the final destination, upon return, families left behind, to really create that picture. And when we started, the reason why we wanted to go a little bit here, and this is something I really want to stress, is that drivers of migration is not something new within the landscape, especially in the landscape of scholars. I mean, there are the whole migration theory out there, and especially, I mean, there are quite some orthodox theories still there, have only been really questioned lately, since a couple of years, where the debate is finally going and is going much more in depth. So one example is the push-pull theory, where we have now the push-pull plus theory. And this is also something I am trying to do with the IOM teams on the ground, is to actually take the whole drivers outside of the very classic box, which says, okay, drivers are often either economic or they are like involuntary or forced. So what we are trying to do is, we are obviously looking at those main key drivers, which are fueled in the more like orthodox theories, but also trying to bring new things to the table that scholars can actually go more in depth. And what you see more and more now, and also the debate, is to find alternative conceptualizations. So what we are trying to do is, we are trying to, first of all, not only look into those general drivers, but to really look at individual level, the micro situation. So, and we are doing individual interviews, thousands and thousands of them. So what is this micro level situation of that migrant, either potential or the one that has already migrated? What are the role of social relations? What is the role of culture? How is the world viewed? And what is the recent influence of social media? We are really underestimating the role of social media. And then, of course, it comes with a set of economic opportunities, because the poorest of the poor in general cannot migrate internationally, right? So you need to be lifted out of a certain level of poverty. And then, how do people choose countries? Is this because of how they see the world? We are looking into the type of information they have. We are looking into the type of social networks they have, and what are the political controls. And what we have learned is that, and we are not there yet, if you really want to understand drivers, it is important to first of all understand that in general, the overall micro level triggers are quite similar. But in order to understand the multi-complexity of the drivers, you really need to look into the geographies, the actual emotional value migrants have for particular things, social relations, obligations migrants have. So often the role of the social network or the social pressure is underestimated. Things like that. And also we often underestimate displacement and previous migration experience. So what do we see? We see definitely difference in particular educational backgrounds and social network leads to different migration. Absolutely. However, we often then, when we look at actual triggers, because people often don't look at an individual trigger, this then can also be more generalized. The core motivations are often the same when we look at, for example, migration from Nigeria, or migration from Iraq, or migration from Afghanistan, or migration from Bangladesh. But the actual situation on the ground and the small triggers that are there are different and are often very culturally linked. So therefore, what we are trying to build the evidence now, and we will continue for another 3 years. So this will then in the end be solid 7 to 8 years of research, is to step out of the classic box and to look at it more nuanced, and to hopefully together, especially with the academic world, with the scholars out there, to try to also step away from the classic orthodox migration theories and to see if we can bring more nuance there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivianne. And if you'll allow me to follow up there with you a little bit on the spot. So you are talking about moving a little bit from the classical understanding of migration as as an economic drivers of migration into looking more at the macro level. If I can ask you in terms of practicalities on the ground, having this understanding of the micro drivers. How can we use this? How can, for instance, an agency like the IOM, who is very operational by nature, use these better understandings of drivers in programs, but also beyond this, when talking about migration?
Yeah, so one of the examples, which is even a more complex model we have built and I'm showing here, is Afghanistan, where every 6 months we are trying to understand in the communities where we know there's high in or out migration, internal and international, trying to first of all understand the numbers, right? The actual numbers. And then what we do in those communities is to collect information on general indicators, from livelihood to wash to security to, call it social cohesion. And based upon those, plus we have the drivers of migration survey on a regular basis, which even goes more in depth. What we do with all of this information, we triangulate, and we see, for example, that don't quote me on this because I'm just picking 2 provinces, not correct, that for example, in Kandahar, the approach of integration or regulation of displacement needs a very different approach than Ghor. Why? Because the basic needs there are very different. And if you don't understand the basic needs within that community that drive migration, then you cannot stop basic migration. On top of that, when people economically develop, they often migrate, but then there are different needs as well. So we try to build those layers, and we do interventions based upon this. And not only us, there are many others in Afghanistan, luckily.
Thank you, Vivianne. It's really very fascinating to also hear about the data collection that you and the team are doing. So thank you for sharing that with us. it's definitely food for thought for us.